Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 344 for the 7th of Cheshvan in a leap year. So pretty recently, we began the Torah anew, right? The book of Bereshis, Genesis. In the very first section of Bereshis, we have the whole story of creation, the whole story of Adam and Chava and all of that stuff. And including that story is the story about how they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And this tree of knowledge of good and evil, Etz Hadat Tov V'Ra, is like, it's taught that it was an actual physical tree that they ate from. But there's a lot of depth there in terms of what that tree actually represents, what we can think of in terms of that tree being today in our lives. That's what we're going to be talking about today is what is the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Well, how does that manifest in our lives? So if you've been following along the past few episodes, then we've been talking about what this tree of knowledge of good and evil is not and what people have tended to think of it as. Certain people have had the misconception that what the tree of knowledge of good and evil is, because they think knowledge, knowing about good and evil, that has to do with the study of Jewish law and the study of what's allowed, what's not allowed, and that kind of thing. And we see that actually the basis for a lot of people thinking this kind of thing is actually a passage from a section out of the Zohar, in what's known as the Rea Mehemna section of the Zohar, where it actually talks about, it makes a reference to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and it seems to imply there that it's talking about Jewish law. But what we've been exploring in the past few episodes is that this can't actually be the case, because we see that really, essentially, in many other places, the entirety of the Torah is referred to as the tree of life and not the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and how we can't actually say that any part of Torah is evil. So it's like to imply it's the tree of knowledge of good and evil seems to imply that there's evil inherent in the Torah, and there's not. And we went into a lot of different discussions about that. And today, now we're going to address the question of, okay, if all of those things are not the tree of knowledge of good and evil, if learning Jewish law is not the tree of knowledge of good and evil, what is the tree of knowledge of good and evil? And the answer, in short, and then we'll get into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe explains it, is it's not the study of these things that's the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but it's actually the subject matter of these things that are being learned. It's actually the actual things in our reality that we deal with. So it's like when we learn about the laws of Kosher, for example, what animals are allowed, what animals are not allowed, what are we allowed to eat, what state of mind should we be in when we're eating. All of these kinds of things, the actual animals themselves, the actual raw materials of creation are what we can think of as being the trees of knowledge of good and evil. And this tree of knowledge of good and evil basically is really about the purpose of it for us here is to sort through it, to sort the good from the bad, to make it clear what is good, what is bad, what are we allowed to eat, and then eat those things, hopefully with the right mindset. What are we not allowed to eat and not eat those things, and what that's all about. And this is going to be bringing up a lot of certain themes and teachings that we've learned about previously in Torah, about the deeper meaning behind the words isur and heter, which is like forbidden and permitted, and what that means on a more Kabbalistic spiritual level. So it's it's a really interesting section. And for context, we are still in the middle of Epistle 26 of Iggeres HaKodesh. And so let's get into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe explains this. So the Alter Rebbe begins this section, and he says that really when you examine closely the lashon, the language that's found in that citation from the Rea Mehemna that we began this section with, where it talks about this tree of good and evil, what it actually says is that the tree of knowledge of good and evil, di'ihu isur v'heter chulei. This is for that which is forbidden and that which is permitted. What it does not say, however, is it doesn't say Torat isur v'heter. It doesn't say the Torah of isur and heter, of what's not allowed and what's allowed, or the halachos of what's forbidden and what's permissible. So meaning to say, so explains the Alter Rebbe, that it's not that the Torah of like the actual laws of what's allowed, what's not allowed, that's the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is like sort of like the supposition that we were working off of, that some people might be assuming that that's what it is, but rather the actual thing itself, which is forbidden or which is permissible, that is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's because that is, as we explained elsewhere in Tanya, and it's also written about in the Eitz Chaim, is the klipas noga. This is the luminous husks, as we spoke about them, which we spoke about this was earlier on in the Tanya, but the Alter Rebbe reiterates it here now, that when we say this, the word asur, which means forbidden, what it literally means is it's the root of that word is bound, meaning that the klipa rests upon this object. So let's say if you have like food that is like some non-kosher food or something like that, that food what rests upon that food is a klipa, is a husk that's bound. It cannot be elevated. It cannot be lifted up, which is unlike something which is mutar. Mutar, on the other hand, means unbound, something that is like it can be lifted up, can be released. Meaning to say that why? Because something that's mutar is not bound. It's not connected. It's not tied and forbidden in the klipos. So this is like sort of a Kabbalistic understanding, which again we've spoken about previously in the Tanya, as to what makes something permissible or what makes something forbidden. Is it like, this is why, like, why is it that we're not allowed to eat certain types of food? Is because like the energy, the spiritual energy within them is bound up and it cannot be released. The klipos that are holding it back that are resting upon it are bounding it in such a way that it's trapped. There's nothing we can do to release it. Versus those things that are muta, they also have a klipa that rests upon them, but they're not bound. They're mutar. They have the ability to be released. And how do they get released? In the case of things that are permissible is through the person, like let's say if we're talking about food, if the person has the right intention, if they have the intention of eating this kind of food for the sake of serving God, then the klipa within it can be elevated. And so too, even if let's say a person doesn't have, let's say somebody eats a food that's kosher, so it is permissible, and they just eat it. They don't have like a very specific type of food or anything like that. They just eat it, but then they use the energy from that food to go and serve God. Like they use that energy then to go to go pray to God or something like that. So you wake up in the morning, and let's say whether you have breakfast or whether you have coffee or whatever it is that gets you up in the morning, you use that energy that you got from the coffee or the food to then go pray to God. This also elevates that coffee or that food to God, to upwards, because it's mutar, because it's permissible. It's not bound. And technically speaking, like the Alter Rebbe gets into the technicality of what goes on here, is that the letters of Torah and the tefillah and the prayer that the person is engaged in after consuming this food rise up to God. And this causes the energy to become clarified within the food. So it's like basically the good part gets elevated out of it. And this happens during the week. This happens on weekdays, right? But on Shabbos, what happens, it's a very special thing that the klipas noga gets elevated on its own accord with the chitzoniot, with the external aspects of all of the worlds. And so this is why it's a mitzvah to eat all kinds of good things on Shabbos, like to really eat a lot of meat and wine, like really almost to what it might seem like if we were to eat so much in such a lavish way during the week, we would be considered somebody who might be called a glutton or a drunkard. You look at the amount of wine and food that we consume. I might have told this story before on the podcast, but I'll relate it again. Is when I was younger, then my family had a foster child for a while named Marshall, who was very cute. He was a little kid. I think he was like 3 years old, and he would come to us on Shabbos. And one time we said to Marshall, what do we do on Shabbos? And he said, eat. And we all started laughing. But he's not wrong. Like a lot of what we do on Shabbos is really just all about eating. So it seems kind of strange from the outside. It's like on such a holy day, which is all about like, sanctification of the world and all that stuff and really connecting to God. What do? The mainstay of Shabbos is eating, is the food, is the wine. And we're supposed to eat meat and fish and all that stuff because the klipas noga in those things on Shabbos has the unique ability to elevate those things, even if a person doesn't have any sort of specific kavana. So this is why we specifically want to eat as much as possible on Shabbos. Like we want to really indulge, obviously not to the point where you make yourself sick or that it's really just unhealthy or overindulgent, but you want to enjoy your food and you want to eat good food, good quality food. And however, now the Alter Rebbe goes on and he says, this is not the case with something forbidden. Something forbidden cannot be elevated, not even on Shabbos, not on a weekday, not even if somebody were to use that food, that non-kosher food, and to learn with it and to or to pray with it. Somebody could argue that, like, let's say someone is on vacation, right? And there's a really nice coffee shop or little restaurant or something down the block that is not kosher, but they say to themselves, you know what, I'm really hungry and I'm going to go eat whatever I want in that restaurant. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to use that energy to pray to God and to learn and that kind of thing. That doesn't work. It doesn't work that way because food that's not kosher cannot be elevated in the same way. It's asur, it's bound. Now there is one exception to the rule, which the Alter Rebbe does mention here. This is if a person eats for the sake of a pikuach nefesh, like to save a life. This is something that is allowed and then it becomes a total permissibility. So if God forbid somebody's in a situation, like let's say, people were in the Holocaust or in prison or something like that, and it was just, you either eat the food that's not kosher or God forbid, that you wouldn't be able to survive. In that instance, you actually are allowed to eat the non-kosher food. And there's no, not only is there nothing, you're not going against anything forbidden. In this case, spiritually speaking, you actually could elevate the food. So the status of the food, the spirituality of the food actually changes in that instance. Okay, so that's the case for the actual food, the actual substance that is going on that we're utilizing in these cases. But when it comes to the actual learning of the Torah about these different laws that have to do with the forbidden or the permissible or what's impure or what's pure, like this is like the Mishnah or the Breita that are found in the Gemara and the actual codifiers who explained all of these things, like the rabbis that get into this and clarify all these different halachas, practical halachas, which is basically the entirety of the body of the oral law. This is the sphera of Malchus of Atzilus, as is explained in many parts of the Holy Zohar, in countless portions of the Zohar. So too, like at the beginning of the Tikkunei Zohar, it says Malchus is peh. Malchus is speaking, right? Which we spoke about that before. Malchus is the idea of speech, and so this is why it's associated with the oral law, because the oral law is also all about speech. And when we're talking about Atzilus, so it's Malchus of Atzilus. Malchus of Atzilus, God and His causations are one and the same. Ihu v'galmu ichad. We've spoken about this before, meaning to say that the light of the infinite light of God is unified there in Atzilus with utmost unity, which this is the will and the wisdom that are vested within His speech, which is called Malchus, where everything is one. So, and that's the end of the section. And so, and so basically the main takeaway is just this idea that this Eitz HaChaim Tov V'Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, is not how many people mistook it to be. This the study of all the different laws. Like, it's not that like the study of Kabbalah is the tree of life, and then the study of the laws and the details and stuff like that is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They're both the tree of life. So what then, if they're both the tree of life, what is the tree of knowledge of good and evil? This is the subject matter that's being learned about in these different laws. This is the actual things, the actual food, the actual animals, the actual actions, things like that, whether they're permitted or forbidden. They fall into the realm. These things, these objects that we do these actions with, fall into the realm of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's what the tree of knowledge of good and evil is. So that's it for today, and we will continue with this epistle tomorrow. So stay tuned, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.